In the annals of athletic competition, there exist stories of triumph achieved through raw physical superiority, through the undeniable gifts of speed and strength and endurance that separate the exceptional from the merely talented. These stories are celebrated and retold, their heroes elevated to the status of demigods whose bodies performed feats that ordinary mortals could only witness in wonder. But there exists another category of triumph, rarer and in many ways more remarkable, in which victory is achieved not merely through physical excellence but through the application of intelligence to circumstances designed to ensure defeat. These are the stories of athletes who faced not only the challenge of competition itself but the additional burden of systems constructed specifically to prevent their success, and who found ways to dismantle those systems through cunning, creativity, and an understanding of their opponents that surpassed their opponents' understanding of themselves. The story of the sprinter who outsmarted an entire federation belongs to this second category, a tale of brilliance applied under pressure, of a mind as exceptional as the body it inhabited, of victory achieved against odds that would have crushed any spirit less formidable. The federation in question had ruled its sport with an iron grip for decades, a vast bureaucratic apparatus that determined who could compete, under what conditions, and with what support. Its leadership was drawn almost exclusively from a single demographic, men of comfortable means and conventional prejudices who viewed their positions as guardianships of tradition rather than stewardships of opportunity. They spoke frequently of fairness and merit, of the level playing field that supposedly characterized athletic competition, but their actions consistently favored those who already possessed advantages of wealth, connection, and complexion. Athletes who emerged from the right backgrounds found doors opening before them, invitations extended, resources allocated with generous hands. Those who emerged from the wrong backgrounds discovered that the path to competition was strewn with obstacles both visible and invisible, with requirements that seemed designed not to ensure quality but to exclude the unwanted. The sprinter who would eventually expose this system's vulnerabilities had emerged from circumstances that the Federation's leadership could barely imagine. Born into a community that had been systematically denied access to economic opportunity, educational resources, and political power, he had grown up understanding that the rules governing society were not neutral arbiters of merit but instruments of control wielded by those with power against those without. This understanding, absorbed through countless daily experiences of discrimination and disadvantage, would prove to be his greatest asset in the battle ahead. Where others saw the Federation's regulations as fixed realities to be accepted and accommodated, he saw them as human constructions that could be analyzed, understood, and ultimately circumvented by anyone willing to think carefully enough about their weaknesses. His physical gifts had been evident from childhood, a speed that seemed almost supernatural to those who witnessed it, an ability to accelerate and maintain velocity that set him apart from every competitor he faced in local and regional competitions. But these gifts, remarkable as they were, would have meant nothing without access to the higher levels of competition where national and international recognition could be achieved. And it was precisely this access that the Federation seemed determined to deny him. The qualification standards shifted mysteriously whenever he approached them, the scheduling of events conflicted inexplicably with his ability to attend, the paperwork required for registration multiplied and complicated itself in ways that more favored athletes never experienced. It was as if an invisible hand was constantly rearranging the landscape before him, ensuring that no matter how fast he ran, the finish line remained perpetually out of reach. Lesser individuals might have succumbed to despair in the face of such systematic obstruction, might have concluded that the game was too thoroughly rigged to be worth playing. But the sprinter possessed a quality that his adversaries in the Federation had failed to anticipate, a strategic intelligence that analyzed their tactics with the same precision he brought to his running technique. He began to study the Federation's rules not as a supplicant seeking to understand what was required of him but as an opponent seeking to identify weaknesses in their defensive formations. He collected copies of every regulation, every bylaw, every procedural requirement, assembling them into a comprehensive map of the bureaucratic terrain he would need to navigate. And in the quiet hours of the night, after his training sessions had concluded and his body demanded rest, his mind continued to work, searching for the gaps and contradictions that every complex system inevitably contains. The plan he eventually developed was elegant in its simplicity, though its execution would require patience, discipline, and a willingness to accept short-term setbacks in pursuit of long-term victory. He had identified a series of qualifying events that the Federation could not easily manipulate, competitions held under the jurisdiction of international bodies whose authority superseded that of the National Federation. By achieving exceptional results in these events, he could establish a record that would be difficult to ignore, a body of evidence that would make any attempt to exclude him from major competitions transparently unjust. But simply competing in these events would not be enough, for the Federation had shown itself willing to absorb considerable embarrassment rather than yield to pressure. He needed to create a situation in which the cost of excluding him would exceed the cost of admitting him, a calculation that would require shifting public opinion in his favor. The first phase of his plan involved building a network of allies both within and outside the athletic community. He reached out to journalists who had shown some willingness to question the Federation's practices, providing them with documentation of the obstacles he had faced without directly accusing anyone of wrongdoing. He connected with other athletes who had experienced similar treatment, creating a loose coalition of the excluded who could support each other and share information. He cultivated relationships with officials in international organizations who might prove useful in pressuring the National Federation to reform its practices. None of these efforts produced immediate results, but together they laid the groundwork for what was to come, creating a web of connections that would prove invaluable when the moment of confrontation arrived. The second phase required him to perform at a level so exceptional that denial would become impossible. This meant not merely winning races but winning them by margins that shattered existing records, not merely qualifying for events but dominating them so thoroughly that his exclusion from higher levels of competition would appear absurd to any objective observer. He adjusted his training regimen accordingly, pushing his body to new extremes while maintaining the precise technique that distinguished great sprinters from merely fast ones. The physical toll was considerable, and there were moments when injury seemed certain, when the accumulated stress on muscles and joints threatened to end his career before it had truly begun. But he persisted, guided by a vision of victory that encompassed not just individual races but the transformation of the system itself. The results he achieved in this period were nothing short of extraordinary. In competition after competition, he crossed finish lines so far ahead of his rivals that timekeepers initially doubted their instruments. His times in practice sessions, witnessed by coaches and fellow athletes who could attest to their accuracy, suggested that he was capable of performances that would rewrite record books if only he were given the opportunity to attempt them in sanctioned events. Word of his abilities spread through the athletic community and beyond, reaching the ears of sports enthusiasts who began to ask uncomfortable questions about why this obvious talent was absent from the major competitions they followed. The pressure on the Federation grew incrementally, a slowly rising tide that its leadership monitored with increasing concern. The Federation's response to this mounting pressure revealed the depths of its commitment to exclusion. Rather than simply admitting the sprinter to competitions he had clearly earned the right to enter, its leadership devised new obstacles, new requirements, new bureaucratic hurdles designed to delay and discourage without appearing overtly discriminatory. They demanded additional documentation that would take months to assemble. They imposed training requirements that could only be met at facilities from which he was effectively barred. They scheduled qualifying events at times and locations that made his participation practically impossible. Each new obstacle was presented in language of neutral procedural necessity, but the cumulative effect was unmistakable to anyone paying attention. It was at this moment that the sprinter revealed the next phase of his plan, a maneuver so unexpected that it caught the Federation's leadership completely off guard. Rather than continuing to fight for admission to the competitions from which he was being excluded, he announced his intention to compete in an alternative event, one organized by an international body that had been seeking to challenge the National Federation's monopoly over elite athletic competition. This event would be held in a neutral country, broadcast to an international audience, and would feature many of the same competitors who participated in Federation-sanctioned events. By choosing this path, the sprinter was not merely seeking an opportunity to demonstrate his abilities but directly threatening the Federation's control over its sport, exposing the vulnerability of an organization that had grown complacent in its power. The Federation's leadership faced a dilemma they had not anticipated. If they ignored the alternative event, they risked losing relevance as audiences and athletes alike recognized that meaningful competition could occur outside their jurisdiction. If they attempted to prevent their athletes from participating, they risked a rebellion that might fracture the organization they had worked so hard to control. And if the sprinter performed as well in this event as his practice time suggested he would, his continued exclusion from Federation-sanctioned competitions would become an international embarrassment, a scandal that might invite intervention from governmental authorities who had thus far remained on the sidelines. The comfortable certainties that had guided the Federation's decision-making for decades suddenly seemed far less stable. The alternative competition itself became a spectacle that drew attention far exceeding what its organizers had anticipated. Journalists who had been cultivating relationships with the sprinter saw an opportunity to tell a story that their audiences would find compelling, the narrative of an underdog challenging an unjust system, a lone athlete taking on a corrupt establishment. The coverage emphasized not only his athletic abilities but the obstacles he had overcome, the discrimination he had faced, the intelligence and determination with which he had outmaneuvered his opponents. By the time the event began, the sprinter had become something more than an athlete. He had become a symbol of resistance against arbitrary power, a representative of all those who had been excluded by systems designed to maintain the privileges of the few. The race itself was almost anticlimactic given everything that had preceded it. When the starting signal sounded and the sprinter exploded from his blocks, the outcome was never in doubt. He ran with a freedom and joy that observers found almost startling, as if the years of struggle and frustration had been transmuted into pure forward motion. His winning margin was so substantial that commentators initially suspected an error in the timing equipment, a suspicion that was quickly dispelled when his result was confirmed and reconfirmed by multiple independent measurements. He had not merely won, he had announced his presence to the world in terms that could not be ignored or minimized or explained away. The aftermath of this victory set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately transform the Federation and the sport it governed. International media coverage of the sprinter's triumph and the Federation's history of obstruction created pressure that political authorities could no longer ignore. Investigations were launched into the Federation's practices, revealing a pattern of discrimination that extended far beyond the treatment of any single athlete. Reform-minded officials within the organization, emboldened by the shifting political winds, began to challenge the old guard's control over decision-making processes. And the sprinter himself, now a figure of international recognition, used his platform to advocate for systemic changes that would benefit not only athletes who looked like him but all those who had been marginalized by arbitrary exercises of bureaucratic power. The Federation's leadership, those men who had so confidently manipulated their organization's rules to maintain their vision of who belonged and who did not, found themselves increasingly isolated as the world changed around them. Some resigned in disgrace, their reputations permanently tainted by their association with practices that now seemed indefensible. Others attempted to reinvent themselves as reformers, claiming that they had always harbored private doubts about the policies they had publicly enforced. A few retreated into bitter defiance, insisting to their dying days that they had been right and that the world had simply failed to appreciate their wisdom. But regardless of how individual leaders responded, the Federation as an institution was forced to transform itself, to open doors that had been firmly closed, to acknowledge that excellence could emerge from any background and deserved recognition regardless of its source. The sprinter's subsequent career confirmed everything that his early performances had promised. Competing now in events from which he could no longer be excluded, he accumulated victories and records that established him as one of the greatest athletes his sport had ever produced. But those who knew his story well understood that his most significant achievement was not any individual race or championship but the transformation he had catalyzed in the structures that governed athletic competition. He had demonstrated that intelligence could be as valuable as speed, that understanding systems was a form of power available even to those whom systems were designed to exclude, that the facade of neutrality behind which discrimination often hides could be stripped away by anyone willing to examine it carefully enough. The lessons of his example extended far beyond the world of athletics into every arena where institutions claimed to operate according to principles of merit while actually enforcing hierarchies of privilege. His story became a template for those facing similar obstacles in other domains, a demonstration that seemingly invincible systems often contained vulnerabilities visible to those who approached them with analytical minds and strategic patience. The Federation he had outsmarted served as a cautionary tale for other organizations that mistook their current power for permanent security, a reminder that those who build walls to exclude the talented may eventually find those walls turned against them by the very people they sought to keep out. In the years following his competitive career, the sprinter became an advocate and mentor for younger athletes navigating the complexities of organized sport. He shared not only his technical knowledge of training and racing but his understanding of how to analyze and address institutional barriers. He warned against the temptation to accept unfair treatment as simply the way things were, insisting that every system was a human creation capable of being modified by human action. He emphasized that the goal was not merely individual advancement but structural change that would benefit all who came after. His influence on subsequent generations of athletes could be traced in the careers of countless individuals who credited him with teaching them that excellence alone was not always sufficient, that sometimes victory required understanding the game beyond the game. The federation that had tried so hard to exclude him eventually came to claim him as one of its proudest products, an irony that did not escape those with long memories. Official histories were quietly revised to minimize the obstacles that had been placed in his path, to suggest that his rise had been recognized and supported rather than resisted and obstructed. Some of those who had been his most determined opponents within the organization reinvented themselves as his early champions, hoping to share in the reflected glory of his achievements. He observed these revisions with a wry amusement that never quite crossed into bitterness, understanding that the human capacity for self-deception was as limitless as the human capacity for courage and determination. The stadium where he had achieved his breakthrough victory still hosts competitions, though the sport has evolved in ways that would be unrecognizable to those who watched him run. Technology has transformed timing and training and broadcasting. Globalization has expanded the pool of competitors to include athletes from countries that barely participated in his era. The demographics of both athletes and administrators have shifted in directions that would have seemed impossible when he first encountered the federation's barriers. But something of his spirit persists in that place, a reminder that physical speed is only one dimension of athletic greatness, that the mind which directs the body may ultimately be more decisive than the muscles which propel it forward. His story endures because it speaks to something fundamental in the human experience, the encounter with systems that claim objectivity while practicing discrimination, the choice between accepting exclusion and fighting for inclusion, the discovery that intelligence applied strategically can overcome obstacles that seem insurmountable. He was not the only athlete of his era to face prejudice, and he was not the only one to overcome it, but the particular manner of his triumph, the way he analyzed the Federation's weaknesses and exploited them systematically, set him apart as a figure whose significance transcended his sport. He demonstrated that those who lack conventional power may still possess the power of understanding, and that understanding, carefully applied, can reshape the very structures that seem most permanent and unchangeable. The sprinter who outsmarted an entire federation left behind more than records and championships, more than the changed policies and open doors that were the direct results of his advocacy. He left behind an example of what becomes possible when physical excellence is combined with intellectual sophistication, when the determination to succeed is matched by the wisdom to identify the most effective path to success. He showed that the obstacles placed before the marginalized are not impenetrable walls but human constructions with human weaknesses, susceptible to analysis and vulnerable to strategies developed by minds acute enough to perceive their flaws. In doing so, he provided a model not just for athletes but for anyone facing institutional barriers designed to maintain unjust hierarchies, a demonstration that the game beyond the game can be won by those who take the time to understand its rules and the creativity to identify where those rules can be turned to different purposes than their creators intended. The world he helped to create is not perfect, for no human creation ever is, but it is measurably better than the world he entered, more open to talent from diverse sources, more resistant to the arbitrary exercise of exclusionary power, more conscious of the ways that seemingly neutral rules can produce discriminatory outcomes. This is his legacy, not merely the seconds shaved from records or the medals accumulated in display cases but the transformation of a system that had seemed permanent into something more just, more inclusive, more worthy of the athletes who dedicate their lives to pursuing excellence within its structures. He ran fast, but his greatest speed was the speed of thought, the quickness with which he analyzed problems and devised solutions, the velocity of a mind that refused to accept that barriers erected by the powerful must remain standing forever. And so his story continues to be told, In locker rooms and training facilities, in classrooms and boardrooms, wherever people gather to discuss how change happens and what makes it possible. The sprinter who had no support, who faced a system designed to ensure his failure, who responded not with despair but with a plan, who executed that plan with patience and precision, who ultimately achieved not only personal victory but institutional transformation, he remains a beacon for all who find themselves confronting obstacles that seem impossible to overcome. His message echoes across the decades, as relevant now as it was when he first demonstrated its truth on the track, that systems built to exclude can be dismantled by those they seek to exclude, that intelligence is its own form of power, and that those who understand the game beyond the game may ultimately prove to be its most masterful players.